They said, "Mom, do what we tell you or it's a nursing home." And I remember the words hitting me like hail on a tin roof, echoing through my old farmhouse kitchen. I froze behind the doorway, flour still on my hands from rolling out pie crusts, as my daughter Sarah and her husband Leon discussed my future as if I were a stray dog. Their voices were low and sharp, but they cut deeper than any blade, and in that moment, my 74 years of life felt both heavy and defiantly strong. Before I share the phone call that changed everything and how I fought back against their ultimatum, I need you to know who I am and why this battle mattered. My name is Alison. I was born and raised in a small town outside Des Moines, Iowa, and I have lived through droughts, recessions, childbirth, and widowhood with grace and grit. I am 74 years old with laugh lines etched by decades of sun and laughter, and I will not be bullied into surrendering the life I built with my late husband, Tom. As you listen, please tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what you're doing. Are you sewing, folding laundry, or taking a walk? Because our shared stories matter. This story will stir anger at injustice, frustration at manipulation, and hopefully support for a woman who decided she'd rather risk loneliness than be controlled by those she loved. Tom and I married in 1969 after he returned from Vietnam, and we bought our first 40 acres on a handshake, working side by side to turn Iowa soil into corn and soybeans. He was a gentle giant who loved John Deere tractors and the way the sunset painted the fields gold, and I loved watching him wipe sweat from his brow with a red bandana. We had 2 children, Sarah and James, and we raised them with values like hard work, honesty, and community, teaching them to respect the land and the neighbors who helped us through lean years. Our farm thrived despite droughts and floods. And by the time Tom passed away 15 years ago from a stroke, we had paid off our mortgage and saved enough for a comfortable retirement. After his death, I downsized the farm operation, renting the acreage to a neighbor while keeping the farmhouse and barn, which were filled with memories and the smell of hay. I also updated my will and set up a revocable living trust that left the farm to Sarah and James equally, believing they would honor Tom's and my wishes and care for me as I aged. James moved to Colorado to pursue a career in agronomy and visit on holidays, while Sarah stayed in Iowa, married Leon, and gave birth to Ellie, my only grandchild, who became my joy. Sarah was always headstrong and independent, but after marrying Leon, she seemed to change, her laughter replaced by tension, her once easy hugs replaced by arm's-length pleasantries. Leon, a former insurance salesman turned property flipper, charmed everyone at first with his jokes and his flashy pickup truck, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he saw dollar signs everywhere. He would compliment my pies while glancing around the house as if assessing its resale value, and he'd ask questions about my finances in the guise of helping me plan. Still, I tried to be gracious because Sarah's happiness mattered to me, and when Ellie was born, I set aside my misgivings to be the doting grandmother who babysat and sewed quilts. From the moment she could crawl, Ellie had curly blonde hair and a giggle like wind chimes, and she wrapped her tiny fingers around my heart as we fed calves and collected eggs together. But as Ellie grew into a mischievous toddler, Sarah and Leon started using her visits as leverage, dangling time with my granddaughter in exchange for my compliance with their plans. They would call and say things like, "Mom, if you'll sign these papers, we'll bring Ellie over next weekend." Or, "If you don't cooperate, we might have to cancel her sleepover. At first, I thought they were joking, but soon I realized they were serious, and each time they withheld Ellie, my heart clenched like a fist, because love can be weaponized. They wanted me to add Leon's name to my bank account, to put him on the deed to the farm, and to give them power of attorney, all under the guise of protecting me. I reminded them that I had a trust and that James was also an heir, but they dismissed my concerns and accused me of being paranoid and ungrateful. One Sunday afternoon, after church and potluck at the First Methodist, they came over unannounced with a stack of documents and a notary they'd found on a local Facebook group. Sarah held Ellie in her arms and whispered, "We don't want to do this, Mom, but we can't keep letting you live like this. You're going to fall and we'll have to put you in a nursing home." Leon added, "We found a place in West Des Moines where you can have bingo and 3 meals a day, but only if we manage your assets to pay for it." And my stomach dropped. I felt a surge of rage and hurt as I realized they were using my age and their child to manipulate me, and yet I kept my voice calm as I asked them to leave the papers. They said they would wait while I signed, but I insisted on reading them, and after they left in a huff, I sat at my kitchen table under the glow of the farmhouse lamp and began to read. The documents granted Leon joint ownership of my checking account, durable power of attorney for finances, and control over the farm if I were deemed incapacitated, an open invitation for abuse. My heart pounded as I saw their plan laid bare, and I decided then and there that I would fight this, no matter the cost, because Tom's and my legacy was worth protecting. The next morning, I called my attorney, an old friend named Martha, who has handled our wills and farm leases for decades, and I asked her to meet me that afternoon. Before heading to town, I baked a batch of oatmeal raisin cookies to steady my nerves, the familiar smell of cinnamon reminding me that my hand still held power. When I arrived at Martha's office, she listened as I recounted Sarah and Leon's threats and their repeated use of Ellie as a bargaining chip, her brow furrowing with concern. She told me that Iowa is a one-party consent state, meaning I could legally record conversations I was part of without telling them, but she cautioned that other states require all parties to consent. She reminded me that some states, like Illinois and California, have strict two-party consent laws where recording without everyone's agreement can lead to penalties, so always check your state's law. Martha also explained that while they were my children, adding them to my bank accounts could open the door to financial exploitation, and that banks can freeze accounts if suspicious activity is detected. She quoted a policy saying banks are allowed to restrict or freeze your account to investigate fraud, during which time you might not have access to your money, so caution is wise. Regarding my property, she told me that as long as I own the farm, no one can evict me or change the locks without a court order, even if they claim they're protecting me. In Iowa, she said, even landlords must obtain a court order before evicting a tenant, and they cannot turn off utilities or throw out belongings without one, which gave me comfort and legal armor. We reviewed my trust and will, adding a clause that anyone who contests the will would forfeit their inheritance, a no-contest clause designed to deter frivolous challenges. Martha recommended I create a new bank account at a different institution to safeguard funds, monitor my existing account for unauthorized activity, and set up text alerts for every withdrawal. She also suggested that I meet with my financial advisor to review beneficiaries and ensure that my accounts were properly titled in the name of my trust to avoid probate. Armed with this knowledge, I drove home with a mixture of anger, sadness, and determination, swirling like a storm cloud, and I began to plan my next steps. Over the next week, I recorded phone calls and in-person conversations with Sarah and Leon, legally in Iowa because I was a party to each conversation, capturing their manipulative tactics. They didn't know I had this evidence, and they continued to pressure me, even telling Ellie to ask, "Grandma, why won't you do what Mommy wants?" Which broke my heart in two. I responded gently to Ellie, telling her that grown-ups have complicated decisions and that I love her no matter what. Then I excused myself to go cry behind the barn. During that week, I also visited my bank, where the teller's eyes widened as she pulled me aside to a private room and told me there had been an attempted addition of Leon to my account. She said the request was flagged as suspicious because his name was not on any documentation, and the bank had frozen the transaction until they could speak with me. I thanked her and filed a fraud alert, and she reminded me that banks have every right to freeze or restrict an account if they believe fraud is occurring, even if it inconveniences the account holder. I asked to move most of my funds into a new account that only I could access, and I set up online alerts that sent a text each time any money left my accounts. I also changed my online banking password, updated my two-factor authentication, and shredded unused checks, feeling both overwhelmed by technology and grateful for the protection it offered. Later, I met with my financial advisor at Edward Jones, who helped me transfer my certificates of deposit into the trust and reviewed my IRA beneficiaries, ensuring Sarah and James were listed correctly. I shared my fears with him about being forced into a nursing home, and he gently explained that so long as I remained mentally competent and my finances were secure, no one could legally force me into one. He did mention that if family members petition for guardianship, a court might appoint one, but only after a rigorous process with medical evaluations and hearings, not on a whim. These meetings gave me confidence, but the real turning point came one rainy Thursday when the phone rang just after supper while I was watching the 6 o'clock news. I answered, expecting a telemarketer, but it was a woman named Lynn from the Department of Human Services calling to follow up on an anonymous report that I was being financially exploited. She spoke softly, explaining that someone had reported concerns about my children controlling my finances, and she asked if I felt safe and if I needed help. My heart pounded because I hadn't told anyone outside of Martha and my advisor, and I suspected James had filed the report after our recent call, where I hinted at what Sarah and Leon were doing. I invited Lynn to come out for coffee, and when she arrived the next day, we sat at my table with the cookies I'd baked, and I told her everything, including the recordings. She listened, took notes, and assured me that Iowa takes elder abuse seriously, whether it's physical, emotional, or financial, and that her office would investigate any attempts to exploit me. She gave me brochures about elder abuse hotlines and reminded me that I could apply for a no-contact order if Sarah or Leon became threatening. After she left, I felt a surge of relief, like someone had finally acknowledged the gravity of my situation and was willing to stand with me. With the investigation underway, I decided it was time to confront Sarah and Leon, but I didn't want to do it alone, so I called James and asked him to fly home for a family meeting. He arrived from Denver on Saturday evening, his hug reminding me of Tom's, and he told me he had sensed something was wrong when Sarah kept asking him to sign away his share of the farm. On Sunday afternoon, we invited Sarah, Leon, and Ellie to the farmhouse, telling them we had important matters to discuss, and they arrived with stiff smiles and an expectation of victory. We sat at the dining table that had hosted decades of family dinners, and I opened by saying that I loved them but had to set boundaries, because love without boundaries is self-betrayal. Sarah rolled her eyes and Leon crossed his arms, but I continued placing copies of my updated trust, bank statements, and a letter from my attorney on the table. I explained that I had met with my attorney and financial advisor, recorded conversations, and filed a fraud report, and that any further attempts to control my finances would be reported to authorities. I also told them that the Department of Human Services was investigating an anonymous report of elder abuse, and their faces blanched like milk, the first sign that they understood the seriousness. Then I played a short clip from one of the recordings where Leon told Sarah he would send me to a nursing home if I didn't sign, and Ellie's voice in the background asking why Grandma was being stubborn. Sarah's cheeks flushed crimson and she sputtered excuses, saying she was stressed and just wanted what was best for me, while Leon glared at me like I was the villain. James leaned forward and said, "Sis, if you ever use Ellie's visits to manipulate Mom again, you will answer to me." And his voice left no room for doubt. Leon tried to argue that the farm belonged to them by right of being the closest child, but Martha had joined us via speakerphone and calmly reminded him that my trust said otherwise. She also explained that contesting the trust would trigger the no contest clause, leaving them with nothing, and that legal challenges are expensive and rarely successful when a document is well drafted. Anger and fear flickered across Leon's face, and he muttered something about me being ungrateful, but I held my ground and said, "What's ungrateful is threatening to put your mother in a home." I turned to Sarah and told her I still loved her, but that trust is earned through respect, not demanded through threats, and until she showed she could respect my boundaries, I needed distance. I then looked at Ellie, whose big brown eyes brimmed with confusion, and I pulled a small quilt from a basket, telling her that this was hers no matter what happened. I hugged her, whispering that Grandma loves her and will always be here, and I prayed silently that she would remember my love even if visits became sparse. Sarah sobbed and clutched Ellie, and Leon stormed out, slamming the screen door so hard it echoed across the yard, spooking the chickens. After they left, James and I sat in silence for a moment, listening to the wind rustle the cornfields, and then we began to clean up the table, picking up the pieces of a fractured family. In the weeks that followed, Leon sent angry texts and threats of legal action, but he never followed through, likely realizing that the evidence was stacked against him and the costs were high. Sarah stopped calling for a while, and my heart ached with the silence, but I filled my days with tasks that nourished me, like knitting, baking, and volunteering at the library. I joined a senior yoga class at the YMCA, where I stretched muscles stiffened by farm work and met friends who had their own stories of adult children overstepping boundaries. One woman told me her son tried to move her into assisted living to sell her house for cash, and she only stopped it by getting an attorney and educating herself on her rights. Hearing her story confirmed that elder financial exploitation is common and often perpetrated by those closest to us, which fueled my resolve to speak out. Around this time, I saw an article in the local paper about a bank freezing an elderly man's account because his grandson tried to withdraw $10,000 to buy a motorcycle. The article explained that banks can and will freeze accounts if they suspect fraud, and it advised seniors to monitor their accounts and set up dual authentication, which made me feel justified in my actions. I decided to share my story anonymously in the letters to the editor, urging readers to learn about one-party versus two-party consent laws, bank fraud policies, and tenant rights. The letter also warned that even adult children can become predators when money is involved, and I encouraged everyone to speak to attorneys and financial advisors before signing anything. The response was overwhelming. Other seniors wrote in with their stories, and the paper invited me to speak at a community center about elder abuse and financial literacy. At the event, I stood behind a podium, hands trembling, and told my tale of threats, recordings, bank alerts, and legal documents, leaving out names but not details. I explained that Iowa's one-party consent law allowed me to record my own conversations, but I cautioned that some states require all parties to consent, so you must know your local law. I shared the line about banks freezing accounts when fraud is suspected and the line about needing a court order to evict or change locks, because those pieces of knowledge empower us. Audience members asked questions about guardianship in nursing homes, and I advised them to consult attorneys and to be wary of anyone who pressures them to sign documents quickly. After the talk, an elderly man approached me with tears in his eyes, thanking me for giving him the courage to say no to his daughter, who had been pushing him to sell his farm. Moments like that made the pain worthwhile. My story wasn't just about revenge, but about turning a painful experience into a guide for others. As months turned into a year, Sarah began to call again, tentatively at first, asking about recipes and the weather, testing the waters of reconciliation. She apologized for her role in the manipulation, admitting that she had let Leon convince her that taking control was the only way to protect me and to secure their future. I listened, still hurt, but willing to rebuild, and I told her that healing would require honesty, therapy, and proof that she could separate herself from Leon's influence. Leon, meanwhile, filed for bankruptcy after a few bad real estate deals and eventually left Sarah, who had to reckon with his pattern of using people and money like disposable tools. During their separation, Sarah moved into a small apartment above the hardware store, took a job at the county clerk's office, and enrolled Ellie in preschool, slowly building a life without him. Our visits resumed, short at first, with Sarah bringing over Hy-Vee chicken salad and Ellie carrying her quilt, and we ate at the same table where the confrontation had occurred. We established new boundaries, no talk of finances unless I initiated, no using Ellie as leverage, and all major decisions discussed with James as well, to ensure transparency and fairness. Sarah agreed to go to counseling, both individual and with me, and those sessions were painful but necessary, unearthing old resentments and exploring why she felt she needed control. The therapist helped us understand that Leon had played on her fears of losing me and of being left out, and that he had weaponized her love for me and for Ellie. Over time, my anger softened into cautious hope, and I watched Sarah blossom into the independent woman I knew she could be. balancing work, motherhood, and self-care without Leon's shadow. She even took a financial literacy course at the community college, learning about budgets, debt, and investments, which she once dismissed as for old people. James and Sarah also improved their relationship, talking regularly about the farm and planning to manage it together after I'm gone, though I made clear that I might live another 20 years. I sold a portion of the farm to a conservation trust, ensuring that the land would remain farmland and not be turned into subdivisions, using the proceeds to fund a scholarship for local students pursuing agriculture. I donated to the church's food pantry and to the local hospital, honoring Tom's memory by giving back to the community that supported us when times were hard. I continued to volunteer at the library, reading picture books to children, and occasionally seeing Ellie in the crowd, her eyes lighting up when she recognized my voice. Whenever she spent the night at my house, we baked peanut butter cookies, read Laura Ingalls Wilder books, and fell asleep to the sound of crickets, free from tension. As for me, I discovered new interests. I took up painting with acrylics, making landscapes of cornfields and barns, and I joined a gardening club where we exchanged heirloom seeds. I also started walking every morning at the local fairgrounds, listening to podcasts about history and science, marveling that at 74 I could still learn and grow. At one of our gardening meetings, a retired judge from Polk County told us that the court docket for civil cases is often months out, so patience is necessary when filing actions. He affirmed that judges require solid evidence, not hearsay, especially in cases of guardianship or property disputes, which made me grateful for my meticulous record keeping. He reiterated that no judge would force me into a nursing home unless I was truly unable to care for myself, and that the process involves multiple evaluations and hearings. Hearing those words from a judge reinforced what Martha and my advisor had told me, and I felt a sense of closure about the fear that had haunted me for months. Throughout this journey, I reminded myself to breathe, to hug myself when anxiety crept in, and to write down 3 things I was grateful for each night before bed. Some nights I was grateful for simple things: the smell of fresh bread, the sight of deer in the pasture, the warmth of my electric blanket on a cold Iowa night. Other nights my gratitude turned to bigger blessings: my health, the support of James, and the courage to stand up against manipulation, even when my heart was heavy. I also learned that self-care is not selfish. On a whim, I treated myself to a pedicure at a small salon in town, laughing with the young women there as they taught me about TikTok. My 1970s mind still can't quite grasp why people post videos of cleaning their fridge, but I appreciate any medium that helps people feel less alone in their chores. Speaking of chores, I still do my own housekeeping, mopping the wood floors that Tom laid by hand, and oiling the old farmhouse table where so many memories were made. Every spring I climb on a small step ladder to wash the outside of my windows with vinegar and water, much to James's chagrin, but independence keeps me young. I also continue to balance my checkbook by hand, even though I use online banking, because there is something reassuring about watching numbers line up under my pen. Sarah laughs at my ledger, but I told her that if she had kept one, she might have seen Leon's overspending sooner, and we both giggled nervously at the truth. Now, when I go to the grocery store, I shop at Fairway for meat and at Hy-Vee for produce, clipping coupons and using my senior discount on Wednesdays. I treat myself to a Casey's donut and coffee once a week because life is too short not to enjoy a glazed donut from a gas station in the Midwest. Every few months, I drive to the Menards store in Ames to browse lumber and dream up small projects like building birdhouses or adding shelves to my pantry. I also go to the farmers market on Saturdays, where I buy honey from a local beekeeper and cheese curds from a dairy farmer, supporting the community that raised me. These brand mentions might seem trivial, but they reflect the rhythm of Midwestern life, practical, thrifty, and rooted in relationships with local businesses. I learned to love my daily routines again, free from the anxiety of wondering when the next manipulation would come, and my heart began to heal. In the summertime, Ellie and I attended the Iowa State Fair, eating corn dogs and walking through the livestock barns, marveling at the size of the prize-winning hogs. We rode the Ferris wheel, and as we reached the top, we saw the vast Iowa landscape of fields and small towns, a reminder of the expansive life I still had. When we got home, Ellie drew a picture of the Ferris wheel and signed it, "To Grandma, from Ellie," and I framed it and hung it next to Tom's Army photo. Another highlight of my year was when James gifted me a tablet and taught me how to video chat, so I could read bedtime stories to Ellie even when she wasn't there. I discovered Pinterest and started saving quilting patterns, garden ideas, and recipes, which made me feel connected to a community of crafters and cooks across the country. One evening, I stumbled across an article about a group of seniors in Florida who banded together to fight a scam artist, and I felt a kinship with their courage. I also found forums discussing how different states handle recording laws. Some people were surprised to learn that their states require all parties to consent, which reinforced the importance of knowing your rights. These online spaces reminded me that I was not alone and that people across the country face similar struggles with unscrupulous relatives and complicated legal systems. Sometimes the comments on my letter to the editor would still be debated online, with younger people calling elders stubborn and older people admonishing them to wait until they walk in our shoes. While I didn't respond to every comment, I smiled knowing that at least my story was sparking conversations and perhaps preventing exploitation. During these days, I also reminded myself to monitor my health. I scheduled regular checkups with my doctor, took my blood pressure medication as prescribed, and joined a water aerobics class at the community pool. The pool smelled of chlorine and echoed with laughter, and I felt my joints loosen as we marched in the shallow end, our instructor reminding us to breathe deeply. After class, we often grabbed coffee at Starbucks, sharing stories about grandchildren and recipe swaps, our wet hair tied up in towels like teenagers at a slumber party. One of my pool friends told me she had set up a trust naming her bank as trustee to avoid conflicts with her children, a strategy Martha had mentioned to me as an option. Another friend said she uses the Mint app to track her spending and that it sends her weekly reports, which I thought sounded handy, though I still prefer paper. These conversations reminded me that there are many ways to protect yourself and that sharing our experiences helps us find solutions that suit our individual needs. As the second anniversary of the confrontation approached, Sarah surprised me with a bouquet of sunflowers and a card thanking me for setting boundaries that ultimately saved her from Leon. The card said, "Mom, I was angry then but grateful now. You showed me how not to lose myself in someone else's shadow, and I'm teaching Ellie that too." Tears blurred my vision as I read, and I realized that sometimes the hard road leads to a more honest relationship, built on mutual respect rather than obligation. Ellie also drew me a picture of a house surrounded by hearts, and she told me she wants to be a farmer when she grows up, just like Grandpa Tom. I smiled and told her she could be anything she wanted, and she said, "But I'll always want to live near you, Grandma," which warmed my soul. James invited us all to Denver for Thanksgiving, and I boarded a plane for the first time in years, clutching my quilt and feeling like a child again as we lifted off. The Rocky Mountains were breathtaking, but the best part was sitting around James's table with Sarah, Ellie, and his partner, sharing a meal filled with laughter and zero tension. We held hands and thanked God for bringing us through the storm, for giving us the strength to stand up for ourselves and the humility to admit when we were wrong. After dinner, Sarah and I sat by the fireplace, and she told me that she had started dating again, this time taking it slow and ensuring that her new partner respected her independence. I told her I was proud of her and reminded her that a partner should enhance your life, not control it, and she nodded, tears glistening. On the flight home, I reflected on how far we had come and how the phone call from Lynn had been the turning point, validating my fears and giving me the courage to act. It is amazing how one phone call can alter the trajectory of a life. It makes me think of all the people who might be one phone call away from reclaiming their power. In the months that followed, I began volunteering for the Elder Abuse Hotline, answering calls from people like me who just needed someone to listen and guide them to resources. Each call reminded me of the desperation and isolation many older adults feel, and I gently offered them hope, knowledge, and the courage to stand up for themselves. I also lobbied at the state capitol with a group of seniors to increase funding for elder abuse prevention and to strengthen penalties for those who exploit their parents. Speaking to legislators in my plaid blazer, I felt like a young activist again, and I realized that purpose can be found at any age. We managed to secure a small increase in funding for hotlines and education programs, a victory that felt like planting seeds that would yield a harvest of protection. I continued to attend my church, where I led a Bible study on boundaries and forgiveness, drawing from my own experiences to illustrate how even sacred relationships need limits. Our small group prayed for those who harm others out of fear or greed, and we prayed for the courage to stand up for ourselves without becoming bitter. At times, bitterness still crept up when I remembered Leon's threats, but I reminded myself that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. So I focused on gratitude and on the future, which included watching Ellie start kindergarten, cheering at her dance recital, and baking pies for the church bake sale. I also looked forward to the day when she would be old enough to understand my story. And I planned to tell her about the importance of respect, autonomy, and love. I will tell her that love sometimes means saying no, and that boundaries are like fences that protect gardens. They keep out pests while allowing sun and rain to nourish growth. As I wrap up this long story, I want to thank you for listening and for thinking about your own life and relationships along the way. If you have ever felt threatened with a nursing home or manipulated by those who should protect you, Please share your story in the comments. Your courage may inspire others. Tell me where you're listening from, what you were doing while you listened, and whether you knew about consent laws, bank fraud policies, and eviction procedures before hearing my story. We are building a community of informed and empowered people who refuse to be silenced or exploited, and your contribution matters. I will read your comments with a cup of tea, picturing your kitchens, living rooms, and front porches as if we were all sitting together in a big circle. If you found this helpful, please like the video and share it with someone who might need to hear it, whether they are a parent, a child, or a caregiver. Remember that age does not diminish our rights or our dignity. If anything, it should increase our honor and respect. I hope you take away that boundaries, education, and legal protection are acts of love toward yourself and those who will inherit your legacy. Sometimes the hardest thing you do, standing up to your own child, becomes the seed of growth for everyone involved. You may not see the harvest immediately, but trust that it will come if you nurture it with patience, empathy, and persistence. As for me, I will continue to garden, quilt, and advocate, because staying active and engaged keeps me young and connected. I will also keep learning. Next month, I signed up for a computer class at the library to better understand online security and stay ahead of scammers. The library's computer lab smells like dust and plastic, but the instructor is patient, and I already learned how to identify phishing emails and avoid clicking suspicious links. Knowledge is power, whether it's about banking, law, or internet safety, and I plan to arm myself with as much of it as I can. Meanwhile, I continue to maintain my trust and will with Martha, updating them whenever there is a significant life change, like Sarah's divorce or the birth of a new grandchild. Martha and I now meet annually to review documents, and each time she reminds me to keep a written list of my accounts, passwords, and beneficiary designations in a secure place. She also encourages me to revisit my healthcare directives, choosing who will make decisions if I cannot. And I made sure to list James as my primary agent. I told Sarah that I will add her as a contingent agent once she demonstrates consistent respect for my boundaries, and she agreed, understanding that trust must be rebuilt slowly. Over coffee at Panera Bread, we discussed my funeral preferences, like what hymns I want and which quilts should drape my casket, so there will be no confusion later. It felt strange but liberating to talk about death openly, turning a taboo topic into a practical conversation filled with humor and love. At one point, Ellie piped up and said she wanted to sing "You Are My Sunshine" at my funeral, and I smiled, telling her she was my sunshine every day. These conversations, though morbid, ensured that my wishes would be honored and that my children wouldn't have to guess or argue, removing one more potential source of conflict. I also told them where I keep my safe deposit box key and what is inside: Tom's medals, our marriage license, and the deed to the farm. So there are no mysteries. Sharing information openly reduced the power imbalance that secrecy can create, and it gave Sarah a chance to prove she could handle sensitive information responsibly. James agreed to handle the paperwork when the time comes, but he promised to loop Sarah in, creating transparency that will hopefully keep peace between them. Meanwhile, life continued. Snow fell on the fields, the furnace hummed, and I crocheted blankets for the church's winter clothing drive. One afternoon, Leon showed up at my door unannounced, his face gaunt and his demeanor subdued, and he asked for forgiveness, saying he had found Jesus and realized his wrongs. I listened, my heart torn between anger and compassion, and I told him that while I forgave him, trust would not be restored, and I asked him to leave and never use Ellie against anyone again. He nodded, tears in his eyes, and walked back to his truck, leaving behind a chapter of my life that I hoped would remain closed. Sarah later told me she had received a similar apology, and while she also forgave him for her own peace, she kept firm boundaries, refusing to let him re-enter her life. Forgiveness, I learned, is more about freeing your own heart than restoring a relationship, and boundaries are the fence that protect the garden of your soul. In the spring, I planted wildflowers along the fence line and watched them bloom, a riot of color that brought bees and butterflies to the farm, symbols of transformation. Ellie loved chasing butterflies, and she would squeal with delight when one landed on her finger, her joy infectious and healing. The farm, though smaller, continued to produce hay bales and happiness, and I felt Tom's presence in every breeze, every sunrise, and every barn swallow's swoop. Sometimes, when I kneaded bread dough, I thought of his hands guiding mine, of his voice saying, "Alison, we built this together. Don't let anyone take it from you." His words echoed again the day I signed a document donating part of our land to the Iowa Land Trust, ensuring that our acreage would remain farmland forever. I cried as I signed, not out of sadness, but out of relief and pride, knowing I had turned a threat into an opportunity to honor our values. Looking back, I see that the ultimatum, "Do what we tell you or it's a nursing home," was the spark that ignited my activism and my growth. It forced me to confront my fears, to educate myself on laws and finances, and to stand up for myself and others. It also showed Sarah that she could survive without Leon, and that she had more strength than she realized, something she now teaches Ellie by example. If you ever find yourself in a similar situation, please remember this. You are never too old to learn, to fight, or to change the course of your story. Seek help, gather evidence, consult professionals, and trust that your intuition is worth listening to, even if it upsets those who benefit from your silence. Also remember that the law can be a shield. Know your state's consent laws for recording. Understand that banks can protect you by freezing suspicious activity, and don't let anyone change your locks without a court order. Hold on to your keys, both literal and metaphorical, and decide who you hand them to with discernment and courage. Learn from my mistakes and my victories. Set boundaries early. Update your documents regularly. And don't wait until someone threatens you with a nursing home to take action. Teach your children about money and respect when they are young, so they grow up understanding that love isn't measured in dollars or control. And if you are a child of aging parents, listen to their wishes, honor their autonomy, and remember that fear does not justify manipulation. As for Ellie, I hope she will remember me not as the grandma who was threatened with a nursing home, but as the grandma who stood her ground, loved fiercely, and baked the best pies. I also hope she learns that kindness and strength are not mutually exclusive, and that using someone you love as a bargaining chip will never lead to happiness. One day when she is grown, I will give her my journals and the recordings or transcripts of my conversations, so she can see the full picture and learn from it. By then, the technology we used may be outdated, but the lessons about respect, autonomy, and legal literacy will remain timeless. Perhaps she will tell her own children about their great-grandma Alison, who turned an ultimatum into a mission and who believed that knowledge is the greatest inheritance. Thank you, dear listener, for staying with me through this long journey. Your attention is a gift, and your willingness to learn is a blessing. If you haven't yet, please comment, like, and share, and let me know what part of my story resonated most with you. I genuinely want to know. If you are a caregiver or a child listening, I challenge you to start a conversation today about boundaries, wills, and trust, because avoiding it only invites confusion and conflict. Maybe after you finish this video, pick up the phone and call someone you love, not to argue, but to connect, because connection is the antidote to fear. And if you are an older adult, treat yourself to something nice this week: a donut from Casey's, a bouquet from Fairway, or a new pair of gardening gloves. And remember, you deserve joy. I will go make myself a cup of tea now, curl up with Ginger the cat. Yes, I adopted a cat too, and read through your comments with a grateful heart. Ginger purrs like a small tractor and loves to chase yarn balls, reminding me that even rescue animals can find new homes and new purposes. She was a stray from the Polk County shelter, and adopting her taught me that opening your heart can be scary but rewarding. Like humans, pets require trust and patience, and they return love tenfold when you show them kindness and consistency. In many ways, Ginger's adjustment to my home mirrors my own adjustment to life after Leon's threats. Cautious at first, then comfortable, then content. She sits in my lap as I write, her warmth grounding me, and she occasionally interrupts by walking across my keyboard, forcing me to slow down. Slowing down is something I've learned to appreciate. When you rush, you miss details like the smell of fresh rain or the subtle change in your child's tone that signals something is off. So I will slow down now and end this story, trusting that you will carry the lessons forward and share them with those who need them. Remember, you have the right to live on your own terms, to protect what you've built, and to enjoy the fruits of your labor without fear. Boundaries, knowledge, and community are your tools. Wield them with courage, and you will find your own phone call of salvation when you need it most. Until next time, take care of yourself, be kind to others, and never underestimate the power of a determined grandmother from Iowa. After finishing my tea, I looked at the quilts folded neatly on the shelf and thought about how each patch represented a piece of my story, stitched together with love and resilience. I decided to start a new quilt project, one that would incorporate fabrics from Tom's shirts, Ellie's baby blanket, and even a piece of the sundress I wore at my wedding. The act of cutting and sewing calmed my mind, and as I pieced the fabrics together, I reflected on the many threads, legal, emotional, and familial, that had brought me here. Quilting is a lot like estate planning. Every square has a purpose, and if you don't stitch them carefully, the whole thing can unravel at the edges. While working on the quilt, I listened to an audiobook about women pioneers who defended their homesteads, drawing strength from their stories of perseverance and courage. Their battles were different: weather, disease, isolation, but the core was the same: protecting what you love against forces that threatened to take it. As I sewed, I also recalled the times Sarah and Leon had insisted I was forgetful. using minor mishaps like misplacing my keys as evidence that I couldn't care for myself. In reality, everyone misplaces their keys, and I later learned that accusing elders of incompetence is a common tactic used to justify taking over their finances. I included this in my talk at the community center, explaining that cognitive decline is a spectrum and that 1 or 2 mistakes do not equate to incapacity. I also encourage seniors to get regular cognitive assessments and to keep records of their doctor visits, which can serve as proof of capacity if anyone challenges them. Another strategy I shared was to separate financial tasks into small weekly routines, like paying bills every Friday morning and reconciling bank statements monthly, which reduces overwhelm. I told my audience that it helps to use a calendar and write down due dates, because memory aids are tools, not signs of weakness. At the library, I checked out a book on digital estate planning, which taught me about creating a list of online accounts, passwords, and instructions for deleting or memorializing social media profiles. I discovered that some companies allow you to designate a legacy contact who can access your account after you pass, similar to a beneficiary, and I set one up on my Apple account. I also learned about fraud scams targeting seniors, including phishing emails, fake charity calls, and grandparent scams where someone pretends to be a relative needing bail money. A woman in my exercise class told me she almost fell for a scam when someone called claiming to be her grandson in jail, but she paused and called her daughter to confirm before sending money. These stories highlight the importance of slowing down, verifying information, and never giving out personal details over the phone or email without confirming the request. I also began using a password manager to store my login information securely, which felt like a leap of faith, but has simplified my online life and strengthened my security. One afternoon, I got an email from what looked like my bank asking me to update my account, but because of my new knowledge, I called the bank instead and learned it was a phishing attempt. The representative thanked me for being vigilant and reminded me that banks will never ask for sensitive information via email, reinforcing the importance of these lessons. Another aspect of my journey involved reviewing my long-term care insurance policy, which I bought when Tom was alive, to ensure it still met my needs and budget. The policy gave me peace of mind that if I ever did need nursing care, I could choose where and how without surrendering control to those with ulterior motives. I invited Sarah to review the policy with me, turning what had been a source of fear into a planning tool, and the conversation helped us rebuild trust. We talked about the cost of nursing homes, assisted living, and in-home care in Iowa, and we researched options like PACE programs that offer community care to keep seniors at home longer. I learned that Iowa's average cost for a private nursing home room is over $8,000 per month, which underscores the importance of planning and not relying on children alone. Understanding the financial reality made it clear to Sarah that her threat wasn't practical, and it opened her eyes to the complexity of caring for aging parents. We also discussed Medicaid eligibility and the 5-year look-back period, realizing that transferring property to avoid paying for nursing care can have serious legal and financial consequences. Martha had warned me about the look-back period. If I transferred assets for less than fair market value, I could be disqualified from Medicaid, leaving me with few options. Sarah admitted that she'd heard from Leon that transferring the farm to her name would help us qualify for Medicaid, not understanding that this was not only unethical, but illegal. This conversation became a turning point in her education, and she began to view my protective measures as acts of wisdom rather than stubbornness. Another issue I explored was guardianship and conservatorship. I learned that in Iowa, courts prefer less restrictive alternatives like powers of attorney, but guardianship can be imposed if no other options exist. However, guardianship proceedings are public, costly, and sometimes exploitative, which is why it is so important to execute documents like powers of attorney while you are still competent. I also discovered that once a guardianship is in place, it can be difficult to remove, which further motivated me to ensure that only trusted people would ever hold that power. I shared this with my senior group, urging them to choose agents carefully and to include backups in case their first choice is unable or unwilling to serve. My neighbor Edna thanked me after the session and admitted that she had never thought about who would make decisions for her if she couldn't, promising to call her attorney. These ripple effects made my ordeal feel purposeful. The knowledge I gained and shared might prevent someone else from being forced into a nursing home against their will. I also discovered resources like the National Center on Elder Abuse and the Iowa Legal Aid Hotline, which provide information and support for people in situations like mine. Including these resources in my community talks gave attendees tangible next steps, because knowledge without action can still leave you vulnerable. I even started a small support group that met once a month at the library, where elders and their adult children could have guided conversations about finances and care. The first meeting was awkward, with strained smiles and nervous laughter, but by the third meeting, people were sharing openly about their fears, expectations, and boundaries. One man confessed that he worried about becoming a burden to his children, and his daughter responded that she wanted to help but needed guidance and time to prepare. These dialogues created empathy on both sides, reducing the likelihood of ultimatums and increasing understanding of each person's needs and limits. Another pattern interrupt I practiced was mindfulness. I downloaded a meditation app recommended by my water aerobics instructor and spent 5 minutes each morning focusing on my breath. Meditation helped me calm my mind, reduce stress, and react more thoughtfully when triggers like Leon's name surfaced, which improved my overall well-being. I also joined a book club that read novels set in the Midwest, exploring themes of family, legacy, and forgiveness, and I found comfort in stories that mirrored my own. We read Jane Smiley's 1,000 Acres, which sparked discussions about inheritance and betrayal, and I shared my perspective as someone who had lived a smaller version of that tragedy. Our group also read nonfiction books on aging and autonomy, including one that explained how the brain changes with age and how to support cognitive health through exercise, diet, and learning. I started doing crossword puzzles to challenge my brain using the New York Times puzzle app on my tablet, and I felt a small thrill whenever I completed a Friday puzzle without cheating. I also increased my intake of leafy greens, berries, and walnuts. After reading They Support Brain Health, which fit conveniently with my garden club's emphasis on fresh produce. My doctor smiled when I told him, reminding me that taking care of my physical and mental health is the best defense against being taken advantage of. He also encouraged me to keep walking to maintain muscle mass and balance, which reduces fall risk and ensures I stay independent longer. Speaking of balance, I installed grab bars in my bathroom, not because I felt frail, but because accidents happen and prevention is easier than recovery. I also installed motion sensor lights in the hallway, at James's urging, to avoid fumbling in the dark, which gave me peace of mind on midnight trips to the bathroom. While I was at Menards buying the lights, I overheard a salesperson telling another senior about a rebate, and I ended up signing up for their rebate program, saving a few dollars on each purchase. Frugality was something Tom and I practiced our whole lives, and continuing it now felt like honoring him, especially when inflation made groceries more expensive. Another way I honored Tom was by attending veteran events at the VFW, where I met other widows and widowers who shared memories of their loved ones' service and sacrifices. At one event, a speaker from the Department of Veterans Affairs explained benefits available to surviving spouses, including burial benefits and pensions, information many attendees didn't know. I applied for a small pension that helps cover my medical expenses, grateful that Tom's service continues to provide for me decades later. I also discovered that as a veteran's widow, I was eligible for a reduction in property taxes, something I would not have known without attending that event. Sharing this information with Sarah and James not only helped them understand my finances better, but also showed them that there are resources beyond family that can support me. Another brand I should mention is the Iowa State University Extension Office, which offers free classes on canning, estate planning, and farm succession, all of which I attended. Through their program, I met an estate lawyer from Ames who gave a presentation on the difference between revocable and irrevocable trusts, and I realized my trust design was still the best fit. He also mentioned that farmland values have been increasing, and that gifting farmland to children can trigger capital gains taxes if not structured properly, which made me glad I'd consulted professionals. This constant learning reminded me that estate planning isn't a one-and-done task. It's an ongoing process that must adapt to legal changes, family dynamics, and personal preferences. By staying engaged and informed, I reduced the risk of being blindsided by new laws or schemes, and I felt empowered rather than frightened by the future. During this period, I also reconnected with old friends from high school on Facebook, an experience that had its ups and downs, but mostly brought joy and nostalgic laughter. We shared photos from the 70s, compared notes on knee replacements, and even planned a small reunion picnic at Ledges State Park, where we grilled brats and reminisced until sunset. At that picnic, one friend mentioned how her daughter had suggested selling the family farm and investing in cryptocurrency, and we all laughed, though she admitted she felt pressured. I told her about my experience, and we brainstormed ways to open conversations without alienating loved ones, agreeing that honesty and education are better than silence. These peer discussions reinforced that none of us were alone, and that generational differences in finance and technology often lead to misunderstandings rather than malice. However, we also acknowledged that sometimes malice is present, and that protective measures like powers of attorney, trusts, and court orders are necessary to shield ourselves. At one point, I joined an online forum for caregivers and seniors, where I read harrowing stories of people being forced into nursing homes or having their homes sold without consent. These stories fueled my advocacy efforts and made me grateful for the support system I had. They also reminded me that not everyone has a Martha or a James in their corner. To help those who don't, I partnered with a local nonprofit to create a fund that provides legal vouchers to seniors facing financial exploitation, ensuring they can afford an attorney when needed. We held a fundraiser at the community center, selling pies and hosting a silent auction. Sarah donated handmade wreaths, and James offered a soil testing kit, and we raised enough for 10 vouchers. Watching our community come together made me realize that resilience is not just an individual trait, but a collective one. We are stronger when we support each other. The fundraiser also attracted attention from the local news, who interviewed me about elder abuse and financial literacy, giving our cause broader exposure. The reporter asked why I chose to go public, and I replied that silence breeds shame and secrecy, whereas openness breeds empowerment and change. I urged viewers to talk to their families, to consult professionals, and to trust themselves, because intuition is often the first alarm bell in exploitation cases. As the camera rolled, I thought about how far I had come, from a weeping mother hearing threats in her kitchen to a confident advocate speaking on television. After the segment aired, I received letters from strangers thanking me and asking for advice, and I responded to each one, offering resources and encouragement. One letter came from a woman in Illinois, a two-party consent state, who said she had recorded her brother illegally and was worried about legal repercussions. I advised her to talk to an attorney immediately. Her letter reminded me to always emphasize that laws vary by state and that what's legal in Iowa may not be elsewhere, which is why knowledge and caution are essential. Another letter came from a man in Florida whose son had opened a joint account without telling him. I directed him to his bank's fraud department and reminded him that banks can freeze accounts during investigations. These correspondences expanded my understanding of the many forms elder abuse can take, from unauthorized joint accounts to coercive control to emotional manipulation. I compiled these stories into a presentation I gave at a regional conference for social workers, hoping to inform those on the front lines about real scenarios they might encounter. Social workers approached me after the talk, thanking me for giving them a window into the emotional turmoil behind the financial abuse cases they handle. One told me she now better understood why some seniors resist help. Trust is hard to rebuild once it has been shattered by loved ones. When I returned home, I sat on my porch swing and watched fireflies dance over the fields, feeling grateful that my story could touch so many lives. The next day, I wrote in my journal that healing is not a straight line. Some days I felt strong, other days I felt fragile, but overall, I was moving forward. I also wrote that activism gave my pain purpose, and that purpose is a powerful antidote to helplessness and victimhood. As fall arrived, I attended a homecoming football game at the high school, bundled up in my Hawkeyes sweatshirt, and cheered as if I were a teenager again. The crisp air and bright lights reminded me of taking Sarah and James to games when they were young, and I felt nostalgic but not sad. At halftime, the band played Sweet Caroline, and the crowd sang along, including a group of teenagers who might someday face the same dilemmas I did. I hoped that by the time they were adults, elder abuse would be less common because of the awareness we were building now. As I clapped along with the band, I looked around and realized that community events like this are the threads that weave us together, creating support networks that can catch us when we stumble. After the game, I stopped by Dairy Queen for a small vanilla cone, a treat Tom and I used to share, and I smiled at the memory. The young cashier saw my Hawkeyes sweatshirt and asked about the score. We chatted briefly, bridging the gap between generations through sports and ice cream. These small interactions are nourishing, reminding me that life is not just about big battles, but also about savoring simple pleasures. Speaking of pleasures, I rediscovered my love for music. I started attending the Des Moines Symphony's Sunday concerts with a group of widows from church. The music transported me, and I found myself humming classical pieces while kneading bread dough, mixing Bach with yeast and flour. I also started listening to country music again, especially songs by Dolly Parton and Willie Nelson, whose lyrics about love, loss, and resilience resonated deeply. Music became another tool for healing, allowing me to process emotions that words alone couldn't capture, and I even took up my old guitar for the first time in decades. My fingers were stiff at first, but muscle memory returned, and soon I was strumming simple chords, singing softly to Ginger as she purred. One rainy afternoon, I wrote a song about standing up to bullies, complete with a chorus about phone calls and nursing homes, and I laughed at the idea of going viral at my age. While I doubt I'll ever record it, the act of writing and singing was liberating, reminding me that creativity has no expiration date. Another creative outlet was photography. I borrowed James's old Nikon camera and began taking pictures of barns, fields, and sunsets, capturing the beauty of Iowa that I sometimes took for granted. I uploaded them to a digital frame in my living room, where each image reminded me of a day spent outdoors, breathing fresh air and soaking in sunlight. Photography taught me to notice details, the way light filters through corn stalks, the texture of rusty barnwood, the pattern of clouds before a storm. Noticing details also helped me detect subtle changes in Sarah's behavior, like the sincerity in her apologies and the absence of Leon's influence. I learned to trust my perceptions again, something that had been shaken when Sarah and Leon tried to gaslight me about my competence. Gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation that makes you doubt your own reality. And I now counsel other seniors to watch for signs like constant second-guessing and feeling confused. I also learned that financial abuse often goes hand in hand with emotional abuse, because manipulating someone's feelings makes it easier to manipulate their money. Education is our first line of defense, and I continue to advocate for elder abuse to be taught in high schools alongside financial literacy and civics. If younger generations understand the signs and consequences of exploitation, perhaps they will be less likely to commit it and more likely to stop it. I suggested this to our school board, and they promised to consider adding a unit to the curriculum, which felt like a small but meaningful victory. As winter set in, I stocked up on salt for the driveway and arranged for a neighbor's son to shovel when it snowed, because asking for help is also a sign of strength. Independence does not mean doing everything alone. It means choosing when and how to accept assistance without feeling forced or manipulated. On Christmas Eve, Sarah and Ellie came over with gingerbread cookies, and we sang carols by the tree, our voices shaky but joyful. Ellie insisted we hang a new ornament, a tiny phone with a gold cord, laughing as she said, "It's a reminder that phone calls can be good things too, Grandma." We all laughed, and I hugged her, grateful that she could find humor in a symbol that once caused me so much stress. The ornament also reminded me of the call from Lynn that began my journey to empowerment, proving that sometimes an unexpected voice on the line brings salvation instead of scams. As we exchanged gifts, Sarah handed me a scrapbook she'd made with photos and letters from the past year, including a copy of her apology note and Ellie's drawings. She said it was her way of documenting our healing process and ensuring we never forgot how far we'd come, and I promised to add to it annually. After they left, I flipped through the scrapbook, tears slipping down my cheeks as I saw the transformation captured in pictures, pain turning to forgiveness, anger turning to advocacy. I added a note on the last page reminding future readers, including myself, that healing is intentional and requires daily choices to communicate, to listen, and to respect. New Year's Day arrived, and I wrote a list of resolutions. Continue learning, continue advocating, continue loving my family, and continue protecting myself. I also resolved to share my story on YouTube, thinking that a broader audience might benefit from hearing a 74-year-old widow from Iowa talk about legal rights and love. James helped me set up a simple recording space in my living room with good lighting, and we practiced the introduction until my nerves calmed. When I finally pressed record, I looked into the camera and saw not a victim but a teacher, a survivor, and a grandmother with stories worth sharing. I uploaded the video, and within hours the comments flowed in, some from Iowa, others from far-flung states and even different countries, each sharing gratitude, stories, or questions. One comment said, "I felt so angry for you at first, but now I feel empowered for myself." And that made me smile and reply with encouragement. Another comment asked how to approach siblings about unfair caregiving burdens, and I suggested starting with a family meeting and a neutral mediator like a pastor or counselor. Some comments thanked me for the brand recommendations, saying they'd never tried Fairway or Hy-Vee but were curious, and I laughed at the small influence I wielded. I realized that sharing personal details like where you shop or what you bake builds trust with listeners and makes the heavy topics more digestible. Throughout the following weeks, I continued to interact with viewers, answering questions, and sometimes just offering a virtual hug, because sometimes that's all someone needs. These interactions brought joy and a sense of purpose, reminding me that my story was bigger than me, and that the pain had been transformed into a lighthouse for others. At the same time, I made sure not to overshare. I maintained my privacy by not revealing addresses or account details, a caution I shared with my viewers. In one video, I addressed a comment asking if I ever regret not letting Sarah and Leon take over, and I responded that regret fades when you choose yourself. I also mentioned that reconciling with Sarah was possible because she took accountability, and because I allowed my heart to soften without abandoning my boundaries. It's a delicate balance, and I encouraged viewers to seek therapy if they're struggling to find it, because professional guidance can untangle knots that self-help books cannot. As spring neared again, I started seeds indoors under grow lights, excited for the promise of tomatoes and peppers, and I thought about how life always finds a way to renew itself. Ellie helped me transplant the seedlings into the garden, wearing her little rain boots and humming a tune from school, and I taught her about the importance of composting and soil health. We turned over worm-filled soil together, and I smiled as she squealed, connecting to the earth like generations of our family before her. I told her stories about her great-great-grandparents who homesteaded this land, and about their perseverance through blizzards and locusts, linking her to her heritage. She asked if locusts would eat our tomatoes, and I laughed and said we have modern pest control now, though the metaphor of a locust seemed fitting for people like Leon. After gardening, we made lemonade with fresh lemons from the store, adding a hint of honey from a local apiary, and sat on the porch sipping and watching the sunset. Ellie asked me, "Grandma, why did Mommy want you to move?" And I took a deep breath, telling her in simple terms that sometimes grown-ups get scared and make mistakes. I told her that Mommy loved me and just got bad advice from someone else, but that we all learned from it and grew stronger, and she nodded thoughtfully. She then said, "I'm glad you're here," and leaned her head on my shoulder, and in that moment, all the legal battles, heartbreak, and advocacy felt worth it. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky orange and pink, and I whispered a silent thank you to Tom, to Lynn, to Martha, and to everyone who had helped me reclaim my life. Looking forward, I plan to keep telling my story, updating it as new chapters unfold, because life is ongoing and lessons continue until our last breath. I also plan to watch Ellie grow, to cheer at her graduations, to cry at her wedding, and maybe hold her children, passing on the lessons I learned. If the day comes when I truly cannot live alone, I will choose where I go, perhaps to a cozy assisted living facility with a library and a garden, and I will go with grace, not fear. But until that day, I will live on my terms, in the home I love, with the people I trust, and with the knowledge that I earned this peace. So if someone ever says to you, "Do what I tell you or it's a nursing home," remember my story and reply, "No, thank you. I know my rights and I will decide." Tell them that nursing homes are not threats but choices, and that you will make that choice when and if it is truly necessary, not when someone wants your money. Take the threat as a prompt to educate yourself, to set boundaries, and to seek help, because the law and community are on your side if you reach out. Remember, too, that money and property are tools, not goals. The goal is to live a life filled with love, dignity, and purpose, and to leave a legacy of wisdom. I hope my story helps you build that legacy, whether you are 17 or 70, because it's never too early or too late to think about how you want to be treated. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your empathy. It has been my honor to share, and I look forward to our ongoing conversation. Don't forget to comment below with your state, your experiences, and any tips you have for protecting yourself or your loved ones from financial and emotional abuse. I promise to read them all, to respond when I can, and to gather your insights into future videos and talks, because collective wisdom is powerful. If you are still listening at this point, you are a true friend, and I send you a virtual hug, along with a mental slice of my homemade apple pie. May your days be filled with peace, your nights with restful sleep, and your relationships with mutual respect and love. If you ever doubt your strength, remember a 74-year-old woman from Iowa who stood up, called her attorney, and changed the narrative. You can do the same. Trust yourself, use the law, and lean on your community because you are not alone in this journey. I'll leave you with one final thought. When the phone rings, answer it with discernment, because sometimes, just sometimes, that call might be the lifeline you need. Goodbye for now, dear listener, and thank you for being part of my story and for letting my story become part of yours. This is Alison signing off with hope, courage, and a heart full of gratitude for the life I have reclaimed and the future I will continue to shape. Until next time, keep your chin up, your documents updated, and your pies golden brown. Life is sweet when you take control of your oven and your destiny. Let's make a pact to check on our neighbors, to talk openly about money and aging, and to support legislation that protects the vulnerable. Let's also agree to enjoy the little things like a good cup of coffee from Dunkin', a new pack of quilting needles from Joann Fabrics, or a drive down a country road with the windows down. I will be here, sitting on my porch swing, watching the seasons change, waiting to hear from you, and ready to share whatever new lessons come my way. Please be safe, be informed, and be kind because the world needs more kindness, and sometimes kindness means saying no. Take care and God bless. After recording that last line, I turned off the camera and took a deep breath, feeling both relieved and energized by the act of sharing my story once again. I celebrated by making a batch of cinnamon rolls using my mother's recipe from the 1950s, and the smell filled the kitchen with nostalgia and warmth. As I watched the dough rise, I thought about how patience is needed both in baking and in healing family relationships, and how the wait is worth it. While the rolls baked, I sat down with my ledger to reconcile my bank statements, marking each deposit and withdrawal with satisfaction and ensuring everything balanced to the penny. Banking has changed a lot since Tom and I first opened our account, but the satisfaction of seeing accurate numbers remains timeless, like the satisfaction of turning a field of soil into a crop. I smiled when I saw my senior discount at Hy-Vee reflected on my debit card, a small acknowledgement of a lifetime of contributions to society. When the oven timer beeped, I pulled out the cinnamon rolls and drizzled them with icing, then set aside a plate to take to my neighbor who had plowed my driveway after the last snow. Acts of kindness, like cinnamon rolls delivered warm, help maintain strong community bonds, which become invaluable when facing legal or emotional battles. Later that afternoon, I called Martha to thank her again for her guidance and to schedule our next annual review of my documents, because it never hurts to plan ahead. She chuckled and said she looked forward to our meetings, partly because of my baked goods, and partly because she enjoys seeing a client take such proactive control. After hanging up, I sorted through old photographs, labeling them for future generations, because stories can be lost when pictures are nameless. I wrote the names of my grandparents on the backs of sepia-toned images, along with notes about where they were taken, so Ellie will know our roots. Preserving family history is another form of legacy planning, and I encourage you to write down your stories, recipes, and lessons for your descendants. You never know which tidbit will give them comfort or guidance someday, long after we're gone. As evening settled, I joined an online church service, singing hymns from my living room and taking comfort in the familiar melody of "How Great Thou Art." Faith has carried me through many storms, and whether you are religious or not, having a spiritual or philosophical anchor can provide stability when life rocks you. After the service, I sat quietly and prayed for Sarah, for Leon, for James, for Ellie, and for everyone who had reached out because of my story, asking for healing and wisdom. Then I prayed for you, dear listener, that you would find the courage to protect yourself and the grace to forgive without forgetting. I blew out the candle on my table, the flame sputtering and then vanishing, and I thought about how even flames need oxygen. Boundaries provide us the oxygen to burn bright. When I crawled into bed, Ginger curled up in the crook of my knees, and I whispered, "Good night, world. Thank you for another day of purpose. Tomorrow, I will wake up and decide again to be vigilant, compassionate, and resilient, because those are choices we make daily." I hope you make those choices too, because small daily choices add up to a life well lived. And remember, even when your heart is heavy, there is always a way forward if you are willing to pick up the phone, ask for help, and trust your instincts. I have been Alison, your storyteller from Iowa, and I will be here when you need another tale of perseverance and pies. Now let's end with a smile. Imagine Ellie running through the sprinkler next summer, her laughter mingling with the chirping of crickets, and know that joy is always possible after sorrow. Until then, farewell. And may your days be as sweet as a cinnamon roll just pulled from the oven. Turn off this video, stretch your legs, call someone you love, and start planning the boundaries that will protect your peace. And if you're like me, make a quilt square or bake a pie while you think, because busy hands can steady a racing mind. Lastly, know that I believe in you, even if we have never met, because anyone who listens this long has a heart capable of great things. Good night and God bless.